Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in time when heaven leans forward, when the unseen aligns with the obedient, and when what once stood immovable begins to tremble. This is not a season of survival. It is a season of divine repositioning. You did not arrive here by accident, and you are not listening by coincidence. Something is shifting in your favor, and it is happening sooner than you think. For too long, many have labored faithfully while facing invisible resistance, working hard, praying sincerely, yet watching financial doors remain closed. But understand this, resistance is often the announcement that release is near. What looked like delay was preparation. What felt like pressure was alignment. You are standing at the edge of a prophetic transition where provision no longer chases you. You step into it before the next calendar turns. Forces that once blocked your progress will be compelled to move. Systems that ignored you will recognize you. Opportunities that bypass you will begin to pursue you. This is not because of luck, and it is not because of chance, but because favor responds when purpose and obedience intersect. There are structures in the spirit that determine what flows in the natural, and tonight, those structures are being reordered. You are entering a season where debt loses its voice, lack loses its authority, and increase finds its assignment. What once required exhausting effort will now respond to divine instruction. Mountains do not move because of human strength. They move when heaven issues a command, and when the command is released, resistance has no choice but to comply. This is a moment to elevate your expectation and recalibrate your faith. You are not waiting for provision. You are preparing for it. You are not hoping for change. You are positioning for manifestation. Before the year ahead unfolds, financial barriers that for years will collapse in succession, one after another, making room for overflow, stability, and legacy. A divine shift is taking place that will realign financial systems, opportunities, and resources in your favor before 2026. This shift is not random, and it is not reserved for a select few who appear more qualified or more connected. It is a strategic movement initiated in the unseen realm, designed to bring order where there was confusion and flow, where there was stagnation. What you have experienced until now was not the full story of your future. It was the groundwork being laid beneath the surface. While it may have seemed like nothing was changing, structures were being repositioned, timelines were being adjusted, and access points were being prepared specifically with you in mind. Financial systems respond to alignment, not effort alone. You can work tirelessly and still feel locked out if the system is misaligned with your assignment. This is why many have done everything right and yet seen limited results. But alignment shifts outcomes. When the right people, resources, and timing converge, what once required years can unfold in moments. This divine shift is recalibrating those systems so that effort finally meets opportunity and preparation meets reward. Doors that remain closed, not because you lacked ability, but because the timing was incomplete, are now responding to a higher authorization. Opportunities are not just appearing. They are being redirected. Streams of provision that flowed elsewhere are being reassigned. Contracts, ideas, investments, and favor are moving toward those who are positioned to steward them with wisdom and purpose. This is not about excess or indulgence, but increase with intention. Resources follow responsibility, and responsibility follows clarity. As your vision becomes sharper, provision becomes more precise. What once felt scattered is being gathered into focus, and what felt delayed is being synchronized. This shift also involves recognition. There are systems that did not see you, platforms that overlooked you, and environments that undervalued your contribution. Not because you were insignificant, but because the season had not yet authorized your elevation. Recognition is not validation of worth. It is permission for access. When that permission is granted, visibility changes, conversations change, and positioning changes. Suddenly, your name enters rooms it never entered before, and your work carries weight it was always meant to carry. Resources move toward momentum, and momentum is birthed by alignment. As this shift unfolds, you will notice that resistance lessens in areas where it once dominated. Decisions become clearer. Pathways become simpler. What felt complicated begins to streamline, and what felt heavy begins to lift. This does not mean challenges disappear, but it does mean they no longer control direction. You are no longer pushing against immovable structures. Those structures are adjusting around you. Before 2026, the recalibration will be evident not only in income, But in strategy, clarity, and access, you will recognize patterns breaking that once repeated year after year. Cycles that drained you will lose their grip, and systems that once limited you will begin to support you. This is the nature of divine realignment. It does not just add more. It puts everything in its proper place, allowing flow where there was friction and progress where there was delay, shifting you from surviving within broken systems to thriving within reordered ones, where every step forward carries intention, momentum, and purpose aligned with what has already been set in motion. Financial resistance you have faced was not denial, but preparation for accelerated increase and release. What felt like obstruction was actually refinement, and what appeared to be limitation was alignment in progress. Resistance is often a signal that something valuable is being guarded, not withheld. If there were nothing significant ahead, there would have been no opposition along the way. The pressure you encounter was not designed to break you, but to strengthen your capacity to carry what is coming next. Every delayed approval, every missed opportunity, every season of stretching was shaping discernment, endurance, and wisdom that could not be developed in ease. Many interpret resistance as rejection, but in reality it is a training ground. When access is postponed, character is tested and focus is sharpened. You learn how to manage scarcity without losing vision, how to remain disciplined without visible reward, and how to steward small resources while believing for greater ones. These lessons were not optional, they were essential. Accelerated increase without preparation leads to instability, but preparation without increase leads to frustration. This season bridges the two, transforming endurance into expansion and patience into release. Resistance also revealed patterns that could not continue into your next level. Certain habits, partnerships, financial behaviors would have collapsed under the weight of increase. The opposition you faced forced evaluation and correction. You learned where leaks existed, where assumptions replaced strategy, and where emotion overrode wisdom. What you corrected in pressure will protect you in abundance. The delay was not punishment. It was mercy making room for sustainability. Acceleration requires internal readiness before external manifestation. Increase moves quickly, and anything unaligned is exposed when momentum shifts. The resistance slowed you down long enough to restructure internally, so that speed would not destroy you later. You learn how to think differently about money, how to separate impulse from instruction, and how to discern opportunity from distraction. These refinements ensure that when release comes, it multiplies instead of vanishing. What felt like standing still was actually strengthening your foundation. While others advanced rapidly and later collapsed, you were being anchored. Depth was forming where others only built height. Stability was taking shape beneath the surface, unnoticed but essential. When acceleration begins, it will not require constant recovery or repair because the groundwork has already been laid. What emerges will stand, not sway. Release follows readiness, not desire. The resistance calibrated your timing, so that increase would meet maturity. This is why what is coming will not arrive in fragments, but in succession. What was delayed will return with interest. Opportunities will converge rather than scatter. Provision will align with purpose rather than overwhelm it. The very areas that resisted you the longest will open with the greatest momentum, because pressure always precedes expansion. You are not stepping into increase as someone untested, but as someone refined. You carry discernment forged in difficulty, discipline shaped by delay, and resilience built under pressure. These qualities ensure that acceleration will not intimidate you, but respond to you. What once demanded excessive effort will now move with precision. The resistance that challenged you has completed its assignment, and its purpose has been fulfilled by preparing you to receive release that arrives not slowly but swiftly, unfolding with clarity, order, and strength shaped by everything you endured along the way. Faith-driven obedience activates supernatural movement where human effort reached its limit. There comes a point where strategy, planning, and relentless effort can no longer produce progress, not because they were wrong, but because they have fulfilled their role. Human ability can take you far, but it cannot take you all the way. When effort reaches its ceiling, obedience becomes a doorway. Obedience is not passive compliance. It is active alignment with instruction that does not always make logical sense, but carries spiritual authority. It is in these moments that movement begins beyond what skill, talent, or persistence could ever achieve. Obedience requires trust, and trust requires surrender. Many stall at this stage because they want assurance before action, confirmation before commitment. Faith, however, operates in reverse. It moves first and understands later. When you respond to divine instruction, even when the outcome is unclear, you authorize intervention beyond a natural order. This is where supernatural acceleration enters, shifting conditions that effort alone could not move. Doors open without negotiation, barriers dissolve without resistance, and timing adjusts without explanation. Supernatural movement is often subtle at first. It does not announce itself loudly or arrive with instant visibility. It begins with internal alignment, clarity of direction, and peace replacing anxiety. You notice that decisions become simpler, distractions lose their appeal, and focus sharpens. This internal shift is the signal that obedience has taken root. When the internal order changes, the external environment eventually follows. What once felt chaotic begins to organize itself around your obedience. Faith-driven obedience also attracts favor. Favor is not fairness. It is alignment meeting opportunity. When your actions align with divine instruction, you find yourself in the right place at the time, engaging with the right people, accessing the right resources. These connections are not random. They are orchestrated. Favor shortens processes, bypasses delays, and grants access where credentials alone would not suffice. What once required persuasion now responds to presence. There's a cost to obedience, but it is not loss. It is exchange. You release control to gain authority. You relinquish certainty to gain momentum. Obedience may require stepping away from familiar systems, trusted patterns, or comfortable routines. It may demand courage to move before conditions appear favorable. Yet every act of obedience positions you for movement that no amount of effort could manufacture. This is where limits dissolve, because the source of progress has shifted. Human effort is bound by time, energy, and resources. Supernatural movement is governed by authority. Authority speaks and systems respond. When obedience aligns you with that authority, obstacles that once required prolonged struggle respond swiftly. What took years to build can change in moments. What resisted negotiation responds to alignment. This is not magic. It is order being restored at a higher level. Faith-driven obedience does not eliminate responsibility. It elevates it. You still act, plan, and steward, but now your actions carry weight beyond their natural measure. Each step becomes intentional, guided, and effective. Movement accelerates not because you're doing more, but because you are doing what is required at the right time. This is where effort gives way to effectiveness, and striving is replaced by flow. When obedience takes the lead, supernatural movement follows, shifting outcomes, rearranging systems, and advancing purpose beyond the limits that once defined what was possible. Hidden barriers affecting income, debt, and provision are being dismantled by divine authority. Many obstacles you encountered were not visible on the surface, which is why they were so difficult to confront directly. You addressed what you could see, worked harder, planned better, adjusted strategies, yet resistance persisted because the true barriers were operating beneath awareness. These unseen constraints function quietly through patterns, cycles, and limitations that seem normal because they have been present for so long. What you call financial struggle was often the effect of invisible restrictions shaping outcomes behind the scenes. Hidden barriers thrive in familiarity. When limitations repeat long enough, they become accepted as reality rather than challenged as restriction. Generational mindsets, inherited fears, unexamined beliefs, and unspoken assumptions can quietly dictate financial behavior without ever announcing their influence. These internal structures affect decisions, tolerance for risk, and expectations for provision. Until they are confronted, effort alone cannot overcome them. Divine authority does not merely address surface symptoms. It reaches the root where transformation must occur. Debt is often treated as a numerical problem, but it frequently reflects deeper systems at work. Cycles of lack, urgency-driven decisions, and reactive choices feed patterns that feel inescapable. Provision may appear inconsistent not because resources are unavailable, but because flow is obstructed. When divine authority intervenes, it does not simply inject temporary relief. It dismantles the frameworks that sustain restriction. This is why change can suddenly feel permanent rather than fragile. What once returned repeatedly begins to lose its grip. The dismantling process often begins internally. Awareness increases. Discernment sharpens. You start noticing patterns you once overlooked and questioning assumptions you once accepted. This internal illumination is not condemnation. It is empowerment. You cannot dismantle what you cannot identify. As understanding grows, authority is restored. Decisions become intentional rather than reactive, and choices align with long-term stability rather than short-term survival. Internal clarity creates external movement. Provision responds to authority. When barriers are removed at the root, flow naturally increases. Opportunities that once felt inaccessible begin to surface without excessive strain. Resources align with purpose rather than creating anxiety. Income becomes more consistent, not necessarily because effort increased, but because obstruction decreased. This is the effect of dismantling rather than striving. When the blockage is removed, flow resumes. Divine authority operates beyond visible systems. It restructures timing, relationships, and access in ways that human planning cannot replicate. Barriers that resisted negotiation respond immediately to higher command. What once required constant effort to maintain begins to stabilize. The weight lifts not because circumstances magically disappear, but because control has shifted. When authority changes hands, outcomes change naturally. This dismantling also creates space for stewardship. Freedom from hidden barriers does not lead to chaos. It creates order. You begin to manage resources with clarity rather than fear. Planning becomes strategic rather than defensive. Vision expands because survival is no longer the primary focus. As barriers fall, capacity increases, allowing you to sustain what flows toward you. The effects of dismantling extend beyond finances. Peace repla. CS anxiety. Confidence replaces hesitation, and expectation replaces resignation. When provision is no longer obstructed, generosity increases, legacy becomes possible, and impact extends beyond personal need. This is not simply about receiving more. It is about functioning freely. Hidden barriers lose power when exposed to divine authority, and when they are dismantled, the systems that once constrained income, debt, and provision no longer define direction, allowing flow, stability, and growth to emerge with consistency and purpose aligned with a higher order now operating in your favor. This season marks the transition from financial struggle to stability, overflow, and lasting legacy. Transitions are rarely announced with clarity. They are recognized through subtle shifts in pressure, perception, and positioning. What once required constant effort now begins to respond with less resistance. The struggle that defined previous seasons starts to lose its intensity, not because responsibility disappears, but because alignment has changed. Stability does not arrive as excess. It arrives as order. It is a moment when income, decisions, and purpose begin to work together rather than compete with one another. Financial struggle often narrows focus to survival, forcing every decision to be reactive. In that state, vision becomes limited to immediate needs, and long-term thinking feels unrealistic. Transition lifts that weight. As stability emerges, mental space opens. Planning replaces panic, and foresight replaces urgency. You begin to think beyond the next obligation and consider sustainability, growth, and impact. Stability is not the absence of challenges. It is the presence of control, clarity, and consistency. Overflow follows stability, not the other way around. When systems are ordered, resources can multiply without creating chaos. Overflow is not defined by excess spending, but by excess capacity. It is the ability to give without depletion, invest without fear, and build without constant recovery. In this season, increase carries purpose. Resources align with vision, and provision supports assignment rather than distracting from it. What flows toward you does not overwhelm you because your structure can sustain it. Legacy thinking emerges when struggle no longer dominates attention. Legacy is built intentionally, not accidentally. It requires margin, patience, and long-term perspective. As this transition unfolds, decisions begin to reflect generational impact rather than immediate gratification. You consider what will remain after the season passes, not just what satisfies the moment. Legacy is not measured only in wealth, but in stability transferred, values modeled, and systems established for those who follow. This transition also redefines identity. You no longer see yourself as someone trying to catch up, But as someone positioned to build, confidence shifts from fragile to grounded. You make decisions from strength rather than scarcity. Opportunities are evaluated through purpose, not pressure. This internal shift is as significant as external change because it determines sustainability. Legacy begins internally before it ever becomes visible externally. Overflow creates responsibility. With increased capacity comes increased influence. Your choices begin to affect more than just your immediate environment. This is why the transition is gradual, allowing wisdom to develop alongside increase. Influence without wisdom destabilizes, but wisdom cultivated through transition stabilizes influence. You begin to steward resources, relationships, and opportunities with awareness of their broader impact. Stability, overflow, and legacy are not isolated stages. They are interconnected expressions of alignment. As struggle fades, clarity rises. As clarity rises, capacity expands. As capacity expands, legacy takes shape. This season is not about sudden display, but sustained progress. It is about building something that lasts beyond the present moment. What you establish now becomes a foundation others can stand upon. The transition redefines how you relate to money, purpose, and future, shifting you from reacting to circumstances to designing outcomes that extend beyond your lifetime, allowing what you build in this season to remain steady, purposeful, and influential for years to come.